as the evening's proceedings will continue. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please kindly take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Mr. Dennis Levine.
It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Colonel Richard Kemp, a great friend of Israel and of the Jewish people, as our guest speaker this evening. As I'm sure many of you already know, Richard had a distinguished career serving in the British Army from 1977 until the year 2006. During this time, he served in numerous operational roles around the globe, including as commander of British forces in Afghanistan. When attached to the Cabinet Office, he worked for the Joint Intelligence Committee and was involved in devising government strategies and procedures on counter-terrorism. Richard has very openly and publicly supported the Israeli Defense Forces' actions in Gaza. I personally returned from Israel last night, having spent some time with the Disabled Soldiers Rehabilitation Organization Beit HaLochem, and I know that getting this support from someone like Richard is immensely reassuring to the soldiers. Ladies and gentlemen, I introduce Colonel Richard Kemp.
Thank you very much, and shalom, ladies and gentlemen. As you can hear, I am multilingual. I'm a Roman Catholic, but I don't hold out too much expectation of being elected to the papacy because I was reminded the other day that I seem to be spending more time in synagogues than I do in Catholic churches, which I'm sure is not good for my soul. Oh, sorry, was that a bit of a discordant note? Well, the only thing I would say is that we do pray for the souls of the Jewish people and the conversion of the Jewish people in Catholic Church on Maundy Thursday. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to put yourselves into my shoes for a moment, going back 8 years. The 7th of July, 2005. At that time, I was working as the head of the International Terrorism Assessment Team in the Joint Intelligence Organization, which was responsible for briefing the Prime Minister and other cabinet ministers on the threat from terrorism that faced the United Kingdom and United Kingdom interests overseas. At 8:50 in the morning, there were 3 explosions on the London Underground. And at first, it wasn't clear whether those explosions were caused by electrical failure or by terrorist attack. But it became clear very quickly that it was terrorist action. Within about 20-25 minutes of those explosions beginning, we convened a meeting of COBRA, which is the UK National Crisis Management Committee. As I was on my way out of my office in Downing Street to attend the COBRA meeting, I was chairman of the Intelligence Coordination Group for COBRA. I got stopped by a phone call. My phone was ringing on my desk. I went to answer it quickly. It was a head of the CIA station in London, who rang me to offer assistance. He had heard, obviously, what had happened. I got another phone call as I was about to try and leave again, and that second call was from the head of Mossad station in London. And the head of Mossad said to me, any assistance that we can provide you, any help of any sort whatsoever, any resources you need, any action of any type that you want, pick the phone up and it'll be done for you, whatever it might be. You can imagine how welcome that message of friendship was at that time. We hadn't experienced Islamist suicide terrorism in the UK before. Most of us were very much bewildered by what happened. We had no warning, there was no intelligence to indicate it was going to happen, and we were as confused and chaotic as the rest of London was. So to have that very welcome message of support was wonderful. And we got it from the US, we got it from Israel. I don't know if there are any Europeans in this room, but we didn't get it from any other country in Europe. We did later, but one knows who one's true friends are immediately. Probably another discordant note, I suspect, there, but anyway. It didn't surprise me to get that type of support from my Israeli friend, because a few years before that I was sent out to Afghanistan, and in the British Army we have a strange way of doing things, and I was literally given 2 weeks' notice to pack my bags, leave Whitehall, get out and take over command of British forces in Afghanistan. 2 weeks isn't a long time, particularly when you've got a wife and screaming kids to worry about. But one of the things I immediately realised was that I was going to be facing the threat of suicide terrorism for the first time, commanding troops who faced that threat. And that was a big thing, a big difference from any form of terrorism we'd faced before. I looked throughout the army, I spoke to a number of people, what is our policy for dealing with it? The answer was, there is no policy. Suicide terrorism is too difficult to deal with. You have to just let the troops go out there and do whatever they have to do. You can't give them guidance because it's too hard. The law won't allow it, etc. Now, I'm sure the vast majority of people in this room are leaders of one sort or another, and you would never dream of leading your people in that way, and I didn't either. So the first thing I did, I got on the phone to this same chap, the head of Mossad in London, and I said to him, you know, tragically, of course, the Israelis at that time were the leading experts in the world on dealing with suicide attack. And I said, I want you to get hold of the military attaché in the embassy and ask him to come and speak to me, or I'll go and speak to him and tell me about how the Israelis deal with suicide bombings. And he said to me, no, I'm not going to do that. And I thought, okay, well, you know, I've shared a few secrets with you in my time, probably secrets I shouldn't have done. I've drunk a couple of cups of coffee with you. You know, you treat me like this. And he said, no, I'm going to do better than that. He sent out to Israel, he got a brigadier general from the Israeli Defense Forces, brought across to London 2 days later. He and I sat in a hotel lobby in West London for 4 hours with him talking and me writing. And from that 4-hour meeting, I concocted the British policy for dealing with suicide bomb attacks, which has now been adopted by the whole of the British forces for that purpose, and has undoubtedly saved British soldiers' lives in the process. Ladies and gentlemen, the connections between the British armed forces and the Israelis go back a long way. We have had a hiccup or two on the way. I won't talk about 1948 this evening, or the years immediately before it. But if you go back to 1917, General Allenby commanded British forces in Palestine, and his first major successful offensive was the Second Gaza conflict, in which my regiment, the Second Battle of Gaza, in which my regiment fought, and ejected the Turks from Gaza. We took 18,000 British casualties, or Commonwealth casualties, in that one battle alone, but the Turks took 45,000 casualties. So it was, of course, a victory. Allenby went on in December to liberate the holy city of Jerusalem, and Allenby famously dismounted from his charger at the gates to Jerusalem and said, I'm not going to ride in here, only one man rides into Jerusalem. He also commanded, as part of his force, the Jewish Legion, predominantly made up of the 8th Royal Regiment of Fusiliers. The Jewish Legion included David Ben-Gurion as a private soldier. Golda Meir wanted to join the Jewish Legion, but they didn't take women at that time, so she wasn't allowed to. And the Jewish Legion fought its most famous engagement at the Battle of Armageddon which immediately preceded the ejection of the Turks from the whole of Palestine and indeed later from Syria. We have a shared moral code as well as sharing experience in battle. Britain and Israel has a shared moral code. And that moral code goes back, as I'll explain, goes back to a common origin. Perhaps, I'm sure that there are plenty of rabbis in this room. I'm sure you can give me more details of much, much earlier, 1,000-year-old moral codes, but I'm talking about in the modern day, dealing with modern conflict. And Winston Churchill, the great war leader and the great friend of Israel, in 1941, at a speech made in the White House, set out the terms of a just war. And I'm going to quote from Churchill. He said, "Ill would it be for us if we were not sure that no greed for the lands or wealth of any other people figured in our ambitions. No morbid greed for material gain at the expense of others has led us to the field of battle. Ill would it be for us if that were so." But this doesn't only apply at the strategic level, it applies also at the tactical level. It applies to how we fight as well as why we fight. And in some respects, Britain has given a legacy to Israel, to the IDF. In the 1930s, there was a large influx of young Jewish settlers and some older Jewish settlers into Palestine, fleeing the totalitarian regimes of Nazi Germany and elsewhere in Europe. And those settlers were beset by murderous gangs of Arabs who were determined to drive them from the land. There was a young British officer by the name of Captain Ord Wingate, who was a British intelligence officer in the British Army, who set his mind on helping the Jewish settlers to defend themselves from the Arab onslaught. And he felt that they were approaching the problem in a wrong-headed way. They were being very defensive. He felt they should go out onto the offensive and attack them before they came and burnt down their villages and killed their people in the villages. And that's what he did. That's exactly what he did. He persuaded the British general to allow him to do it and to get British military assistance in doing so as well. General Moshe Dayan, who eventually went on to be Chief of Staff of the Israeli Army and then Defense Minister, said, and I quote, that Wingate taught us everything we know. David Ben-Gurion, the first Prime Minister of Israel, said that had Ord Wingate lived, and of course Ord Wingate was killed fighting the Japanese in Burma in 1942-43, had Wingate lived, he would have been the first Chief of Staff of the Israeli Defense Forces. And Ben-Gurion felt that it was Wingate's influence back in the 30s that helped Israel to build an IDF so quickly in 1948. One of the things that Wingate taught the young Jewish settlers defending themselves from the Arabs was purity of arms, was to not only to fight ferociously, but to also